It's opening day at the first Morgentaler abortion clinic in Toronto, June 1983. Dr. Henry Morgentaler is wearing a suit and tie, carrying a briefcase. He looks ready for his first day at a new job. And since that job is controversial, news cameras are rolling.
The opening of Dr. Morgentaler's abortion clinic began peacefully enough early this morning. Dr. Morgentaler arrived in mid-afternoon.
Morgentaler walks across Harvard Street, heading toward his brand new clinic. But before he gets to the front door, a balding, disheveled man with his shirt tails hanging out of his pants lunges at Morgentaler, garden shears in hand. The man is pushed away by an abortion activist. Morgentaler looks shaken, but untouched.
This is what we're up against. Fanatics, religious zealots, people who want to deny women the freedom.
It's a close call, but also an omen of things to come. As Morgentaler makes the move to provide abortions to women across Canada, he and his clinics become a lightning rod.
It is a cause which, in biblical terms, almost I saw as a fight between evil and good, between light and darkness. And maybe I'm a bit self-righteous, but I strongly believe in the freedom of choice.
And Morgentaler has no intention of stopping.
Well, where I go from now, I will continue to do abortions. That now is the time to establish clinics, to train doctors, and provide access to medical abortion facilities to women who need them.
Morgentaler is prepared and hopeful. He wants to take his abortion battle to the Supreme Court of Canada. I'm Falen Johnson, and this is See You in Court, a podcast about the cases that changed Canada. This is the Morgentaler decision, Part 2. The debate around abortion has always been polarized, but when it comes to taking a side, Dr. Henry Morgentaler has always been defiant, challenging laws, societal norms, and doing so at great personal risk. Julie Ireton picks up the story from here.
Even before being attacked at the opening of his Toronto clinic, Morgentaler had spent years fighting for abortion rights in Quebec. He had been charged, sent to jail, and eventually acquitted by 3 separate juries. Under the Parti Québécois, doctors were no longer being prosecuted for offering abortions in clinics.
The province of Quebec has the lowest birth rate in Canada and one of the highest rates of abortion.
But while a lot had changed in Quebec, nothing had changed in terms of the law. Abortions done outside hospitals were still illegal. Women still needed approvals from a 3-doctor committee. And anti-abortion voices remained strong.
I disagree completely with the proposition that it's just a decision for the mother. I think that the state has the right and the obligation to decide how far it has to protect the unborn child. And at the moment...
And what about the other side, the pro-abortion rights folks?
Well, across Canada, they were hoping to ride on the coattails of those decisions in Quebec. And that campaign got some oxygen in 1977. It came from a federally commissioned report. The report found that women had to wait, on average, 8 weeks for an abortion in a hospital, and it said that the 3-doctor abortion committees discriminated against poor and rural women. And this was the fuel that activists needed to ramp up their call for the legalization of abortion clinics. And Ontario was the setting for the next chapter of the fight. Carolyn Egan, a longtime abortion advocate, was part of the push.
We founded the Ontario Coalition for Abortion Clinics because we wanted to challenge the law, and it was very difficult to find a doctor who would be willing to do what Henry had done in Quebec.
So they needed to recruit Henry Morgentaler himself.
And so we spoke to him and we asked him, we're trying desperately to get something happening here. Would you be willing?
He soon accepted that invitation. The Morgentaler Clinic in Toronto would become the new epicenter for the fight.
Morgentaler still hopes the Ontario government will leave him alone and let him run his clinic, which will be opening in 8 days on the upper floors of this downtown Toronto building. But the Attorney General, Roy McMurtry, was very firm today. If the police decide that Morgentaler is breaking the law and lay charges,
our Crown Attorney's Office will prosecute these charges if they are laid.
So let me see. Kind of reorient. Everything is so different now. What are the numbers here? 73.
73 Harbord Street, the site of the first Morgentaler clinic in Toronto. The original building still stands. It's now a sushi restaurant. And that's where I met up with Carolyn Egan.
I mean, it looks very much like it did then. It's a Victorian, red brick Victorian, which Toronto is sort of filled with. And
Egan still works in a birth control and sexual health centre in Toronto. She also sits on the board of the Abortion Rights Coalition of Canada. She has long white hair and wire-rimmed glasses. And as we look up at the building, the memories flood back.
The women's bookstore, as I remember, was on the first floor, and the Morgentaler Clinic was on the second floor. And
do you know why the clinic was situated here?
Well, we wanted to be downtown, and I think they looked at a number of properties to rent, and some landlords wouldn't rent when they realized.
When they realized they would be doing abortions there. So the tone was set right on opening day, June 15th, 1983. Not all the neighbors gave a warm welcome.
but when Dr. Morgentaler arrived in mid-afternoon, he was lunged at by a man holding a pair of garden shears.
Right. Enter the man with the garden shears we heard from off the top.
The man with the shears was quickly tackled, and the old TV footage shows him in the back of a police cruiser. He told police he was just trying to scare Morgentaler, but it emboldened the doctor.
I don't want to die. I didn't want to die then. If I may quote Martin Luther King, who was one of my heroes, it's not the quantity, it's the quality of life that's important, and I believe in that very strongly.
From day one, the Toronto Clinic became a magnet for both pro-abortion rights celebrations and anti-abortion protests.
Yeah, we're just here trying to save babies. And I'm just trying to do my job.
And there weren't just verbal assaults. In fact, Morgentaler would eventually go to work in a bulletproof vest.
He was willing to put himself out there. He was willing to be brave.
Ruth Miller was involved in pro-abortion rights campaigns in Canada for decades, and Henry Morgentaler was her friend.
And it takes a certain kind of person to be brave under these kinds of circumstances when there are people who are willing to kill you.
Ruth Miller is now in her 80s. She talks about those days, about abortion, sex. Nothing makes her blush.
We did all kinds of programs, puberty, birth control, relationships, you name it.
Ruth sounds super cool. I would love to hang out with Ruth.
She has a lot of stories to tell, and I can only imagine she was a force 40 years ago. She was on the front lines in public health care, an advocate of women's rights, and later a counselor at Morgentaler's Toronto abortion clinic. And in the early days, as the abortion rights movement got up and running, she'd leave her 3 kids with her mom and head off to a rally.
And we met every Monday night, and we lobbied politicians, we wrote letters.
She was a member of the Canadian Association for Repeal of the Abortion Law, CORAL. Ruth Miller and the others helped raise money for Morgentaler's legal costs. CORAL saw the right to abortion as a human right.
We tried to educate the public about this. I said to myself, this is about sex. You know, don't talk to me about when life begins and all that stuff. This is about sex and women's sexuality and what people think about women's sexuality and so on.
Women must control our fate.
But the picketers also drew out opposing emotions.
Stupid women! You can choose whether to have a baby or not before it's created!
Every woman who came through the doors of the Toronto Clinic, a patient or worker, felt that tension. And they had to set up safe houses and a system of escorts to get women to appointments.
There were pickets outside the clinic. People would come and pray. And I would get out there and I would shout to these guys, "Do you wear a condom when you have sex?" I'm sort of fearless in that way. And my kids don't like me to do that. They think I'm going to get in trouble.
And there could be trouble. This did get serious. Doctors in Canada were shot and threatened. And in the United States, doctors offering abortions were killed. Carolyn Egan witnessed violence at the Toronto clinics.
It was firebombed and a lot of destruction to the bookstore as well.
I'm sorry, the Toronto clinic was firebombed?
Yeah, and Carolyn Egan remembers it was almost like a gut punch to the entire movement.
It was a firebomb that just destroyed the whole thing, and luckily no one in the surrounding buildings were killed. It was done at night, of course, but it was, there are pictures of it. It was just devastated, yeah. So again, what they were trying to do is, obviously demoralize people from seeking abortion, demoralize staff, doctors, because this potential...
I knew that I was a target, and I was determined to be able to continue in spite of all that.
This determination he has is unreal. This must have been really taking a toll on him.
Yet he did not slow down. In 1983, Morgentaler was 60, and he did have heart problems. You remember he had his first heart attack in Quebec jail about a decade earlier. He was into his second marriage. He had 2 adult children and a toddler. So his personal life was complicated, as was his professional life. The abortion clinics he was running were still illegal. And in the spring of 1983, Morgentaler launched a clinic in Winnipeg. Cops there had swiftly moved in and laid charges. They took all the equipment and forced its closure. Then, within weeks of the Toronto clinic's opening, police struck there next.
More than 25 policemen, some uniformed, some plainclothes, arrived at Dr. Henry Morgentaler's clinic.
A witness at the clinic described the raid.
2 police officers posing as a couple wanting an abortion got an appointment at the clinic. Just as the receptionist was talking to them, they grabbed her, forced her down in a chair, held her there so she couldn't alert the staff, and went down themselves to open the door and let 15 police officers into the clinic.
It didn't take long for word to spread, for supporters to collect at the clinic.
Police had to work their way out through a crowd that was growing bigger and more hostile.
Stop police harassment! Stop police harassment!
Morgentaler was arrested and charged along with 2 other doctors, Leslie Smalling and Robert Scott. They all got out on bail, but the equipment in the Toronto clinic was seized, and they were forced to close for weeks. That closure had an impact. Women rejected by the hospital committee systems had to be referred to Quebec or New York for abortions. The taunts and missives against Morgentaler were piercing. And in the summer of 1983, protesters on both sides clashed in front of the Ontario legislature.
Down with fascism! Down with Morgentaler! Fascist pig!
When his clinics reopened, more charges were laid. It mirrored his experience in Quebec 10 years before. And as he had in Quebec, Morgentaler just kept digging in. For him, those clinics were a necessity. The committee approval system was still forcing women to wait several weeks for hospital abortions. And because of the long delays getting the case to court, Morgentaler feared women would wait even longer.
It's a question of 9 weeks to wait until the trial. The trial itself might take about 3 to 4 weeks. Means it's a question of 13 weeks. It is obvious that women cannot wait that long. They need that service now, and as I said before...
Morgentaler, the other doctors, and their lawyers were prepared to answer the charges in Ontario court. Now, the legal team in Ontario was new, but the Quebec lawyers had built a winning argument. They said Morgentaler's abortion services were necessary for a patient's life and health, and they had won on that defense. So they decided to use that argument again in Ontario. Here's Carolyn Egan.
We had to make the situation such that no jury would convict. We wanted it to be the same thing that happened in Quebec. So anybody on that jury listening to the evidence from our side would not be convinced by the prosecution. And the thing was, they broke the law, but we don't respect this law.
The Ontario case began in late 1983, and she testified on the first day.
A Toronto birth control counselor, Carolyn Egan, said abortions for low-income and immigrant women were costly and difficult to obtain. One woman called a hospital clinic 71 times before she could get through.
But the court process was agonizingly slow. There were objections all along the way, several challenges, motions, lengthy delays. A year after it began, the case was finally coming to an end. The judge spent an entire day instructing the jury, and that was something that was harshly criticized by the anti-abortion side. The jury deliberated for just 30 minutes, and it acquitted the three doctors, Scott, Smoling, and Morgentaler. They were relieved and grinning.
I was very confident from the start that the jury, as I said it during my testimony, will understand that it is not a criminal act to help people.
But for those opposed, including Manitoba politician and anti-abortion crusader Joe Borowski, the outcome appeared to be fixed.
It's a black day for the judicial system because for the first time in Canadian history, the jury system has been manipulated to the point where a guilty man, by his own admission, walks out of court scot-free.
Okay, so an acquittal at the Ontario Provincial Court. So by my count, that's the fourth jury acquittal for Morgentaler.
Lucky number 4, but of course, it was not over.
Morgentaler has said that he intends to go right across Canada in each province until the law is changed.
You mean Saskatchewan is next, and then Alberta, and then British Columbia, after all this?
That's what he says.
For Morgentaler, it was essential to keep going, and to him, the premise was so simple.
I believe that women should have a right to own their bodies. I think it's one of the great issues of our time.
There was little time to celebrate the Ontario acquittal. In late 1984, Ontario's Attorney General announced it would appeal, but Morgentaler and his team were determined to reopen the Toronto clinic, and they did a week later.
You know, our chant was, the clinic must stay open. And so people demanded, and that's the people have spoken, the clinic must stay open. After that, we reopened it, and they began seeing patients again.
I make another appeal to the Attorney General to leave the clinic alone and not to raid it.
Authorities ignored Morgentaler's pleas, and the roller coaster took another dip. 10 days after the reopening, the Toronto clinic was raided again. Charges were layered on charges. Dr. Morgentaler and Scott were arrested again by Toronto police. Then the Ontario Court of Appeal set aside the fourth acquittal. And so a new trial was ordered. And Morgentaler got what he had been aiming for, the opportunity to appeal to the Supreme Court of Canada.
So, Julie, back in the 1970s, Morgentaler's appeal to have his case heard at the Supreme Court was rejected. What has changed over that decade? Why would the Supreme Court be willing to hear his appeal now?
Well, there was a significant event in this country since his last trip to the highest court.
Tonight, the Queen makes it official.
Yes, that's the sound when I make anything official. I'll have the club sandwich.
Canada's new Constitution Act was signed in 1982.
As Queen of Canada, I have just had the great pleasure of bringing into force by proclamation.
The Queen signed the Royal Proclamation severing forever Canada's constitutional links with Britain.
And part of that act was the new Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Section 7 of the Charter protects the right to life, liberty, and security of the person. So as the Morgentaler team headed to the Supreme Court, this section was very much on their minds. This time, Morgentaler was represented by Ontario lawyer Morris Manning. Carolyn Egan has vivid memories of January 28th, 1988.
I flew up, actually, with Henry Morgentaler and Morris Manning.
Egan says it was a bit confusing, so much legalese to interpret.
And none of us were used to, perhaps Morris was, but there's a lot of preliminary talk and there's a lot of legalese and all of that.
The court examined Section 251 of the Criminal Code, Canada's abortion law, and it did so in the context of Canada's new constitution. The court ruled 5-2. Morgentaler's previous acquittal was restored.
It became clear that we had won, and it was just extraordinary. I mean, we were beyond belief.
The Supreme Court ruled the existing abortion law was unconstitutional. It violated the right to life, liberty, and security of the person that was guaranteed.
And this is because of the new Charter of Rights and Freedoms?
Absolutely. Here are some of the words from the Supreme Court decision from Chief Justice Brian Dixon.
Forcing a woman, by threat of criminal sanction, to carry a fetus to term unless she meets certain criteria unrelated to her own priorities and aspirations is a profound interference.
Ruth Miller still remembers the words spoken that day.
The Supreme Court was at a point where the right people were on the Supreme Court, and Bertha Wilson, her reasons were absolutely beautiful.
Justice Bertha Wilson wrote,
"Liberty in a free and democratic society does not require the state to approve the personal decisions made by its citizens. It does, however, require the state to respect them."
But the court did not say there was an inherent right to abortion under the Charter. It did say the system regulating access, those 3 doctor committees, was manifestly unfair. So the bottom line was Morgentaler, the other doctors, and their leagues of supporters had won.
I think it's a tremendous victory for women in this country. I think it's a victory for common sense and for justice.
Here tonight, and for years, pro- and anti-abortion forces have picketed, paraded, protested, confronted each other.
What a day! Come on over!
Here, pro-abortion forces tonight cheer their victory. Here, the anti-abortion forces watch their opponents celebrate.
Pro-abortion rights supporters flocked to the streets around the Toronto clinic after the Supreme Court victory. Carolyn Egan remembers the scene.
We were there, and it just filled the streets, filled with just people who were just beyond joy, and they felt that they had won this victory. And that is so important, because when people feel they won it, it's going to be very hard to take it away from them.
4 years ago, exactly 1 month before Morgentaler opened his clinic, I had to go to the United States to get an abortion. I had to go out of my own country. As a Canadian citizen, I have rights to these medical services, and I'm glad that we've got them today.
What did that win at the Supreme Court do in terms of the actual law in this country?
The Morgentaler decision decriminalized abortion. It was a medical procedure to be regulated by the healthcare system, whether the service was provided inside a hospital or at an external clinic, and all abortions would be publicly funded. But it also meant that the option to have an abortion would be up to a woman herself at her request, and a committee of doctors didn't have to decide for her. It had been 20 years since Morgentaler had opened his first clinic. That's 20 years of breaking the law, and now the law was on his side. It was a win that had come at a great personal cost: time in jail, financial loss, 2 divorces. And yet, even after that decision, Morgentaler didn't see it as an end.
The Supreme Court of Canada has said in an unequivocal way that women have a right to abortion if they so choose. Therefore, the task ahead of us is to establish good clinics across the country so that women would not have to come from Edmonton to Toronto or from St. John's, Newfoundland to Montreal. They would not have to wait many weeks of delay in order to get an abortion.
The year of the landmark Supreme Court decision, 1988, Morgentaler turned 65. He had a new partner, and she gave birth to their son, his fourth child. In some ways, he was starting over again, but there were always new battles, and he never stopped fighting. In the early 1990s, the federal government tried to recriminalize abortion without success. And when Morgentaler opened new clinics in the Maritimes, some provincial governments refused to pay for procedures in those clinics. He ended up back in court again and again. He never stopped pushing those boundaries, and he stayed close to his supporters, his friends, including Ruth Miller, who years later still has the photos.
See, here I am with Henry.
They'd never forget January 28th, 1988, the day of the Supreme Court decision.
Every year on the anniversary of the Supreme Court decision, Henry had a party. He had a dinner, and we all were invited, and here we are at the dinner.
Morgentaler died of a heart attack at his home in May 2013. He was 90 years old. Just a few years ago, a little park in Montreal's East End was named after him. It's just down the block from that first clinic in the bungalow. In 2022, a U.S. Supreme Court ruling ended the constitutional right to abortion in that country. Roe v. Wade was overturned.
It's just so unbelievable that today we're facing this terrible, terrible thing that's happened in the United States.
And for activists like Ruth Miller, it was a reminder that abortion rights are still tenuous.
Now, it hasn't happened here. I know people think, oh, it could happen here.
For some, it has reignited the campaign in Canada. While the emergence of the abortion pill has revolutionized accessibility to abortion, access is still an issue for some women. Many Canadian hospitals, doctors, and communities still don't offer surgical abortions.
That is actually where the Pro-Life Club hosts their meetings.
Avrit Jagdev lives here on the University of Toronto campus. She's a law student. When she moved from Calgary in 2021, it bothered her that these groups would set up protests in the heart of the university.
Usually they take all four corners of an intersection, or at least both sides of the street, so it's hard to avoid them.
And back in 2021, there was no pro-abortion rights group on campus. For some, there was an assumption that the campaign had been fought and won a long time ago. Most students here at U of T haven't even heard of Dr. Henry Morgentaler, but Avrit Jagdev has. And she and some like-minded students, offended by the anti-abortion vibe and frequent rallies, decided to take action. They started up a brand new pro-abortion rights group at U of T. And now when they see the anti-abortion campaigners taking over an intersection, they fly into action, grab their own handmade signs.
That's the pile? Yeah, that's the pile. Not your body, not your choice. So we have our slogans.
This new generation of campaigners fear, once again, there's something to lose. Jagdev now sits on the Abortion Rights Coalition of Canada with Carolyn Egan, and the old generation is teaching the new, and vice versa.
I think we always have to be vigilant, and the support for reproductive rights, for abortion access, is still strong in this country, but you just don't know.
None of them want the work of Dr. Henry Morgentaler to be forgotten. Close to 40 years after the Morgentaler decision, it's still up to a woman to make a decision about her own body.
And if there's no law governing abortion, is that a good thing?
As far as Canada's pro-abortion rights movement is concerned, it is a good thing. Activists worry a law could open the door for certain limits on abortion. Another concern is laws can be eroded depending on the political climate of the time. So, today, abortion is healthcare, and that is exactly what Dr. Henry Morgentaler envisioned.
And that's it for See You in Court. If you haven't heard all the other episodes, please do go back and take a listen, maybe share them with a friend. I have to say, I have learned so much in the making of this series, and I'm officially a lawyer. I'm not really, but I feel closer to one. The show was hosted and produced by me, Falen Johnson. Julie Ireton wrote and reported this story. Sam McNulty is our sound designer. Catherine Rolfson is our senior producer. Carla Hilton is our executive producer. Our senior media librarians are Kate Zeman and Nicholas DeCary. Our lawyers are Daniel Stone and Jean-Vive McSween. Our senior digital producer is Fabiola Melendez-Carletti, and our managing editor is Karen Burgess. Special thanks to Julian Uzielli and Julia Poggle for additional voice work on this episode. Thanks for listening to See You in Court.